welcome to the 40k Fireside podcast, where we discuss everything to do with competitive Warhammer 40k with your hosts Vik VJ and David Gaylord.
Hey there and welcome back everyone. Welcome to the 40k Fireside podcast. I'm your host David Gaylord. However, I don't really know why I said that because it's a video format. Anyway, I just want to remind you before we go into this one, we've got a ton of content to cover. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't. I think like 50% of people that watch our videos are not subscribed, so just make sure you get updated. We're releasing videos, especially myself, like 3 a week, and they're always basically on the new meta developments. And as you, if you don't know, 40kfireside.com is where you can learn way more about the game from all the best players in the world with all our masterclasses over there, some of which is going to be taken to talk about these slides as well. So if you like what you see, check that out. Check out Fireside Discord. We have a bunch of great members content and everything like that too. Okay, without further ado, I wanted to do a couple of videos, and I was going to do them based on the current state of the faction. So I'm going to do one for Imperial Guard as well. But recently, I haven't played in Guard for a couple of months now, and I've been playing a lot of Space Marines. Started when I was preparing for a New York tournament a while back. And, mainly it comes from wanting to play something a bit different, get out there and, probably build a collection for a super faction. And, man, what a time it is to be alive if you're playing Space Marines. Compared to playing Guard, we feel like you get an update every 1.5 years. Space Marines, it feels like you just have candy thrown at you every 2 months. Something new comes out. We've had Blood Angels, Space Wolves, Black Templars, Dark Angels, like new detachments, new Grotmas. Little changes can be played in all the different detachments, everything. So it's really exciting to play Space Marines. I never thought I'd hear myself say that, but without further ado, let's jump in. We're going to be covering all of the main Space Marine factions, like I've showed you, all the super ones that have codexes, so to speak, or with regard, Deathwatch as well, because I played a lot of Deathwatch. Kind of rank them. For Black Templars, I'm going to be going over the new stuff and giving a bit of an overview. For Black Templars, if you are interested in them, I will be having a mini masterclass probably come out in about a week's time. That'll have all best tournament builds there for it, so keep an eye out for that. And yeah, we'll be covering all the lists for all the other detachments and what I think about them and where they rank effectively in the meta. So, talking about the meta, let's take a look at the overall picture of where we currently are. So, I thought what I'd do is I'd take the meta when Vik and I did the post-balanced data slate tier list and kind of have a talk through this. So there's a couple of places where we probably went a little bit wrong here. We probably might have had Emperor's Children a little bit too low, but also I think that's because Emperor's Children have had not all of the good players, but majority of the players majority of great players, a lot of them were playing Emperor's Children, and a lot of them have immediately jumped off their faction in particular. So I think Emperor's Children has been hit a little bit harder than otherwise would have. Thousand Sons isn't performing as well, but we also said that WTC it's a lot better. Imperial Knights performing a little bit better than what we had as well. And apart from that, it looks pretty good. Oh, Blood Angels not performing about as well as we thought as well. So, caveat to that, I think both Vik and I would probably say we got those a little bit wrong with those ones. So I just played a tournament this weekend with Space Wolves Stormlance. I had a great time hobbying everything up and an awesome time playing Space Wolves. And I thought my reflection on the meta at the moment, I played Into Knights twice and Custodes, and then I played Deathwatch and CSM. And, I could have played Death Guard there as well, but, I'm also been playing a team tournament where I've played Death Guard twice. So, my impression, and I think a lot of people's impression right now of the meta is that the meta is thick right now. You need to, there are a lot of armies at the top there, presumably Death Guard, Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, which you are going to play a lot in tournaments. You'll consistently play against them, and they are thick. You need to have a serious amount of raw punch and raw power to even compete with those armies. And some of those armies have pretty similar play patterns, actually. For example, Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights now are usually playing the 4 4 build with 2 armigers or 3 build with 6 armigers or something like that. And, they'll put armigers out there aggressively on points. And if you can't trade efficiently into those, then you're going to be in an uphill battle if they start pressing the board really early on. And Death Guard is pretty similar because they'll put Mythic Blight Haulers out there, maybe like a Beast of Nurgle if they're playing one or whatever. And if you just don't have the OC to either contest that or trade up into it, then you're going to be consistently trading down right from early into the game. So that's where you need to have lists that just have a lot of gas in them, really. And that was super apparent when I played Space Wolf Stormlance. On the members section, I'm going to be doing a deep dive into my tournament run there with the whole build and everything and my takeaway thoughts on it. But I was playing a build that, really couldn't handle the stat checks, in all honesty. Despite having 15 Thunderwolf, 10 Bloodclaws and Ragnar, 10 Terminators, and 2 Lancers, I actually kind of struggled against armies like Knights and especially Custodes. So that's kind of where I think the meta is at the moment. And if you're playing on GW and UKTC, the UKTC boards right now are really rough. That is a shooting gallery as far as I'm concerned. So shooting is at a premium because the best way to interact with armies like Knights and Death Guard also is through shooting, in my opinion. In fact, I even think Thousand Suns and Blood Angels, the best way to interact with them a lot of times is actually just in shooting. So this is the first time in a long time I played a list with almost no shooting. So that's kind of, I really found that apparent, especially playing on those boards. So that is my overview going into it. And that's kind of what I think about everything when I'm talking about the following detachments. And that'll kind of make sense here in a bit. Let me know what you think your thoughts are on the meta. Maybe if there's some armies here that are overperforming here. Obviously Aldari is definitely a lot higher than whatever we gave it credit for. It's significantly overperforming GSC, Demons, Necrons at WTC at least, CSM at WTC, based on the type of players and teams that are taking it here. So Aldari is proven to be a bit of a powerhouse here coming back as well. And Vik's doing really well with it. If you want to learn more about Aldari, we're going to have an Aldari Masterclass coming out soon. And with Vik, of course. Okay, so why don't we go, I guess, straight into Space Wars. Here is the list that I was playing. I went 4-1. I lost to Custodes on Dawn of War when I went first, which is just horrific mission, turn combination, and a really hard stat check to get through. Dice certainly didn't help, but that's the way it goes sometimes. So here's the list I was playing. Arjak, Logan, Ragnar. I wanted to hobby and play all 3 of the, Fellowship characters here, so that's kind of why I wanted to take those. Combi Lieutenant, 10 Bloodclaws, which 10 Bloodclaws are really unimpressive the whole event. 5 Intercessors, 5 Scouts, 10 Wolfguard Terminators, 663 Thunderwolf Cav, which I think was a really good combo. Ballistus Dreadnought, and 2 Lancers. Okay, so what I think about Space Wolves. They're a good faction, don't get me wrong. In the grand scheme of all faction detachments that you could play, I do think Space Wolf Stormlance is a good faction. And I think 4-1 is a good position for it to be in. I think it's pretty realistic, really. It has some pretty rough matchups. Because like I mentioned before, it doesn't really have the ability to stat check people. You may think, 15 Thunderwolf Cav and 10 Terminators and 10 Bloodclaws and Ragnar. That's going to do a lot of damage, but let me run you through some stuff here. Ragnar wounds on 5s rerolling into a lot of the meta. The Bloodclaws wound on 6s rerolling into a lot of the meta, and they're AP 1. The Terminators wound on 5s into a lot of the meta, and sometimes 6s into a lot of the meta, with Arjak being the most amount of damage into vehicles. The Thunderwolf Cav wound on 5s and 6s into most of the meta, and 4s if you lance them, and you can only lance in one position. The Thunderwolf Cavalry, the Terminators, and the Bloodclaws all rely on Oath of Moment to really punch through their target. So you do, when you want to bring down a big target, need to put Oath of Moment and +1 to wound on one of your units. But you can only put +1 to wound on your Thunderwolf Cavalry. So if you're going to go for a big push, you're realistically putting Oath on the Thunderwolf Cav target. So what you're left with is like 10 Terminators, 9 of which are basically Blade Guard Veteran in combat, and 1 with a Great Axe. Hitting on 3s, wounding on 5s. It's not stellar, right? So you can see that, like, if you go into a Knight, for example, like, even just an Abominant or whatever like that, or an Armiger is a really good example with 10 Terminators, it's a good chance you don't kill it, which is pretty rough. So you do need to supplement that with a good amount of shooting. I chose 3 platforms here. 2 Lancers and a Ballistus Dreadnought. I also needed something to just put on an expansion that was durable, which the list doesn't really have. You may think, okay, Thunderwolf Cavalry can just put them out there on an expansion, but once they get their numbers reduced, they really don't do much damage at all, right? Because you're already trying to combo Oath of Moment and +1 to wound with the Lance Strap, and you might be wanting to move them further. So if you've got a unit of 4, or if you've even got a unit of 5 compared to 6, it hits significantly lower because you're getting much less investment on your 2 strats that you're using on them. Well, a strat plus Oath. So you do need to supplement with quite a bit of shooting, and you do need to supplement with stuff that can just survive on an expansion. Ballistus Dreadnought is a good target for that. Okay, 2 Lancers. Lancers are okay. I think, my experience has run true when playing against them is that oftentimes they don't do as much damage as you would think, and people tend to overrate their output. For example, you don't have access to Storm of Fire in Stormlance, so you're just shooting at AP4, and against Chaos Knights and Death Guard, they have a 5-up invuln. Okay, so maybe you hit and wound twice, which is above average, and then they make 1 5-up, which is only 17% above average. So, you probably hit and wound, and they versus their 5-up invuln save about 1 to 1.3 times every time you activate, which doesn't really kill a knight. Doesn't come close to killing an armature. So people kind of over-respect them, but the good part about them is that their range is really long. So on these UKTC boards, you have massive long firing lanes now, so you can consistently use them over like 3 turns, which you're going to need to, while your other stuff in Stormlance kind of gums them up. So yeah, what do I think? Death Guard's probably about a 8-12, sorry. Knights, I did play both Imperial and Chaos Knights. I played Lords of Dread with 4 big, 2 small, and I played Chaos Knights Noble Lance with 3 and 6. Both games, my opponents probably over-respected my damage output and played cagier than they should, which allowed me to play more defensive and then play for the end of the game, which was lucky for me. But those are not winning matchups if your opponent afterwards knows the right macro strategy and pushes you. So Thousand Sons and Necrons, they both have a lot more. They are obviously a lot less stat checky. So I've got good winning matchups into those, I think. Reactive Move is really good against Thousand Sons. And then in addition, Necrons just don't have a ton of damage. They can ignore mods with Doomsday Arcs, I suppose, but like a Wraith Brick isn't going to do jack shit to your Terminators or your Thunderwolf Cavalry. And a Doomsday Arc, sure, might hit them, but your Terminators are -1 to wound, your Thunderwolf Cav can be -1 to wound, and if they have ignore modifiers, then okay, you can take, -1 to wound doesn't matter, but at the same time, you can usually rapid ingress and then charge them and stick them up in combat. So the fact that your army's so fast is really good against Necrons. So that's Space Force, Stormlance. I think Stormlance is probably the best build for them. I think Beast Slayer has some play as well. Stormlance is a little bit better on the shooting variants because you have the access to advance and shoot at least, which does come up. And Beast Slayer is probably better on like a much more denser closed board, I would say, and depending on the meta that you're playing into. Stormlance makes the Thunderwolf Cav a lot better because they can actually survive against shooting, whereas Beast Slayer doesn't have the ability to do the -1 to hit and wound on the Thunderwolf Cav. It doesn't have AOC as well, which is quite big, especially on the Terminators. You can play Gladius as well. Gladius is interesting. I've played it a few times, but I felt like the auto advance on the Thunder Cav was really big. But more or less, actually, the advance and charge on demand and fallback and charge on demand was really, really big for Stormlance. So Stormlance is the way that I would play it. I wouldn't change much of the list, but if you were going to change something, it would probably be trying to find, the 10 Blood Claws being swapped out for something else. Okay. Deathwatch. It's a faction I've played quite a lot, and I've probably got well over 30 games of Deathwatch. Tried them out recently for like 10, 12 games, and boy, it's an interesting one. I feel like Deathwatch amongst content creators is probably one of the most overhyped factions. If you have played Deathwatch and you know how to play against it, their army has some serious limitations. For example, Deathwatch is a very narrow list, right? So the list I'm going to show you here is a little bit different from what most people would probably play, but well, it is kind of similar and different, but their list is quite narrow and it has big blobs On top of that, they have 0 access to fall back and shoot. So their big blobs are super vulnerable to getting tagged down. I played against a guy called Ollie Wheeler, who's a great player around London here. Round 1 of Darksphere GT. I had 15 Thunderwolf Cavalry and he had 3 Indominus kill teams. I knew as soon as I could just tag them up, then his whole army shuts down. And that's kind of how Deathwatch functions. So, in my opinion, if you're playing to go deep in a tournament with Deathwatch, you shouldn't go with the big you shouldn't go with more than one Indominus kill team. And even depending on your train format, I'd almost play 6 Assault Centurions, right? Because you can actually advance and shoot them, which is not terrible. So, you cannot advance and shoot them. You can uppy downy them and give them deep strike. But on GW formats, you can step onto the terrain plate and shoot them, which is what I meant to say. Anyway, the list I'm showing here is probably more orientated for like WTC, I would say. And I think if you were playing a really open board, you'd probably want to take... Yeah, I wouldn't even change it if I was playing UKTC, to be honest with you. So, Deathwatch, they have their limitations. Really, they're lacking an update. They've been falling behind other codexes for a very long time. And, you know, I guess from Games Workshop's perspective, there are a lot of Space Marine chapters going on, right? And I don't know why it says Space Wolf Stormlance here. I can change that. Give me 1 second. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? So I can understand why they haven't really received an update when you've got all these other exciting things. And I don't think Deathwatch has a huge player base. In fact, all my Marines are painted in Deathwatch as well. That's how much I've custom shoulder pads and everything. So they've lacked an update for a long time. Their data sheets don't have any good vehicles in them, apart from the Corvus Blackstar, which is not a good vehicle, which is really suffering, right? So I noticed it a lot when I played Space Wolves as well. They didn't really have any good shooting options. So when Space Wolves got the Iron Priest nerfed, it was actually a nerf to their part that covered the weakest part of their army, which is a huge nerf. Deathwatch is kind of similar. It doesn't really have like any great vehicles, and Space Marine shooting options are like pretty limited outside of Ballistus Dreadnought, Repulsor Executioner, you know, Ballistus Dreadnought, and then it drops way off after that, depending on what you're playing, right? Black Templars, we'll get to in a bit, have some different stuff. So, Codex supplements that have good shooting elements in them as well, or amplify shooting elements, are oftentimes a little bit better in my opinion. Okay, so, singles list for Deathwatch, if you like it. Captain with Thief of Secrets with 2 melee weapons. Judicia, Combi Lieutenant, of course. Watchmaster with a Tome of Ectoclades. Now, Watchmaster does go in the Rhino, so you can't use Tome when you're in the Rhino, which is a bit of a downside, but just the way I run it. You can run the Watchmaster with Thief, Gravis Captain with Tome if you want, or you can run another character to try to get the Tome, but it's just, it becomes a bit inefficient after that, so just Tome on the Watchmaster, hope he lives for another turn, you can double Oath afterwards, or just put him on the board. 10-10 Deathwatch Vets, basically all melee loadouts. You can run 10 with the Judy, 10 with the Watchmaster, and then I've got 5 Deathwatch Vets for a basic 100-point trading unit, 5 Intercessors, 5 Assault Intercessors with jump packs. This is like a type of unit that if you want to kill some chaff, you're going to use this unit right here. But you could make a change where you can go down to change out some JPIs, reduce the Assault Intercessor squads for like an ATV and maybe another Intercessor squad, so you can just have a bit more chaff shooting, and then the ATV to contest the objective. But I found 5 JPIs can be kind of useful sometimes if you just want to kill a few guys and then wrap a Rhino on a point, for example, or just move block something early on so that you can stage the rest of your army, because your army doesn't need to stage. You do need to like move block in this army so that your turn 2 can pop off and be a lot better. So 2 units of 5 Deathwatch Termies, 3 Storm Shields, of course, 3 clones, 1 Indomitor kill team for me, 1 Storm Speeder Thunderstrike, and 2 Rhinos. So the Thunderstrike can kind of combo a little bit with the Terminators, +1 to wound, and the Indomitor kill team now go up to strength 11 on the multi-melters. But one of the things that I've realized after playing Deathwatch too is that the damage is just like, it's not anywhere near as big as people proclaimed it to be when I got back onto the faction. Like, the Indomitor kill teams, like, they don't rinse through things. Like, I was expecting to drop an Indomitor kill team, overkill an Armiger by far. Like, no, that's probably not going to happen. It really depends if your melters even hit, for example. So, yeah. I've got a 7-13 into Death Guard if you're playing 2 Rhinos in particular, because obviously Plague Bush Crawlers are insane against most of Marine matchups. A 12-8 into Knights, that might be a little bit ambitious to be fair. You're basically playing for an 8 right from the get-go. 7-13 into T-Suns, yeah, probably something around there, maybe, like, again, if you're lucky. At 10-10 into Necrons, I could see that. I mean, Deathwatch vets, when you're playing 25 of them, do get full rerolls against Necrons, which is nice. And you do have dudes and Rhinos, and you do have access to fallback and charge advance and charge on one squad, which can be good against Necrons. So, that's Deathwatch. I'm assuming not a lot of people watching this probably don't play Deathwatch. They have got some new models potentially coming out in a kill team. We'll have to see where that lands, but, you know, Deathwatch don't really need, you know, better infantry models. They need some of the infantry models to get cheaper, like Indominus kill teams, but they really don't need just more squishy Marines, right? They need some actual synergies outside of just Marine body dudes, which is where they really lack. Okay, Ultramarines. Wow. Skip past that. Ultramarines. You know, the boys in blue, the Smurfs, have been pretty good for a long time. Trying to think. I think probably almost ever since Ultramarines have gotten the Oath of Moment buff or the Gilliman buff, they've been one of the best armies in the game, but boy, have they been underplayed. One thing that was shocking to me is that when I'm looking at some tournament statistics or looking at win rates or looking at play rates in person, and I'm looking at Ultramarines, and I think, wow, you know, compare the amount of Ultramarine players to like Death Guard players or Knights, for example. It's like a quarter, maybe like a fifth, for example, and that is definitely not representative of how good this faction still is. Faction, you know, style of Marines, whatever subfaction or something like that. Because these guys are insanely good. What makes Marines so powerful is that they have access to you know, obviously many different detachments, obviously the ones that come with their codex. But in addition to that, they have the baseline ones in Adeptus Astartes. The two stand out there being Ultramarines Gladius and Stormlance, which do two very different things, which is really useful. Then you've also got Ironstorm as like a backup one, but Ironstorm historically has been very good. So, remember when we talked, I'll go back a couple of slides to talk about the balanced data site tier list. You know, when I was talking about this, one thing that I mentioned was what's really important is having good shooting that can stat check people, I think, in this meta right now, right? No Marine chapter does that quite like Ultramarines does it, for sure. And I think Ultramarines Gladius does that really well here. We've got 2 builds here. Here's Ultramarines Gladius with myself, Manius Calgar, Gilliman, Captain and Gravis Armor, Combi Lieutenant, 5 Intercessors, Company Heroes with Manius. I've got 3 Inceptors. You don't have to play them, but I think they're pretty solid right now. 5 Scouts, 3 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, a Gladiator. You can play any variant. I quite like the Reaper in the and Ultramarine still. And then we've got a Repulsor and a Vindicator. So this is pretty similar to the list I played at Battle for Salvation. The Captain and Gravis Armor has Artificer's Armor, of course. And there's a couple of things that have changed. So what happened was Ultramarines got a nerf to the CP economy. And they got like 50 points in compensation for that. However, the way that the game has changed with Challenger cards... By the way, Challenger cards are fucking terrible. I don't know why they would put them in a game. But because of the way that Challenger cards have impacted the game, you're actually CP discarding way more often than you otherwise would. I would probably CP discard once per game previously, and with Ultramarines you would try and redraw every turn to try and score very high. But now I'm actually discarding a lot more often to try and fuel my CP to prevent my opponent from getting Challenger cards. So that CP economy isn't actually as hard to get as you otherwise would, because you aren't getting +1 CP from Manius, but you're actually getting it from discarding to keep your score lower in a singles perspective so that you don't give your opponent a Challenger card. So, what that means is that overall, it's kind of a wash. I feel like they're basically at the same power level as they were previously. Maybe slightly lower, but the meta has changed a little bit, which has made it actually better for them, I think. So looking at this, we've also got. Okay, let me just talk about Gladius here for a second. The matchups I've got on the right are based on Ultramarines Gladius, so it's like a very similar style list to the one I've got to the left. You can also play like Uriel Ventress, like some Sternguard. You can play Phobos Libby with Infiltrators if you really want. But I've gone with that. Looking at the matchups, an 11-9 into Mortarian's Hammer, I think, is actually super reasonable. You've got Ballista Dreadnoughts and a huge shooting base with 2-up saves, which can be hard for Death Guard to deal with. You've got a lot of units here that don't really mind getting hit by a Death Shroud unit if you're on an objective. And you've got 2 Death Ball units in combat, Manius and Gilliman. Manius they can obviously target, but he's in a repulsor as well if you want. Gilliman they can't target because he's low knob. But Manius has the ability to bog a unit down and actually kill it in Death Guard. So you've got good counterpunch there. And you can set up heroics onto what units are going to Death Shroud charge into their own objectives, which is backbreaking for them sometimes. So I think Ultramarines Gladius is really good. It destroys knights. Like, double oath with +1 to wound is incredible. I certainly noticed a difference playing Space Wolf Stormlance compared to like Ultramarines Gladius with the shooting components. My word, just having 4 rerolls to hit on 2 targets with +1 to wound, like melted the knights. Like 3s rerolling into 2s consistently is completely different from just trying to get a Reaper, a Lancer through 3s into 3s with 1 reroll on each side. Knights are super popular, so having a good matchup to them right now is fantastic. I think they have a good amount of stuff to play against Thousand Suns. You can tick your list otherwise if you are struggling against them. Maybe on WTC, that's not representative. It's a bit more of a 10-10, I think. But on GW and UKTC, the boards are a little more opening, a little more shooting favorable. I think that's really good for Ultramarines. And Necrons, Double Oath is just really solid there. I mean, they poke a DDA out. You've got such a good chance of just killing it, even through a 4-pin bun, even if it's Star Shatter. Wraith Brick, who cares? Gilliman, Rabute, Gilliman. You can lone op, move him up the field, and then when he comes in hard. So, really solid, all-round good. Then we've had Josh Roberts playing Ultramarine Stormlance. So, I mean, there's multiple builds you can go with here. This one's a bit different, right? Because it's playing a Stormraven gunship. This one here really uses the Stormraven well. And I played the Stormraven in Space Wolf Stormlance and found that it actually wasn't that good. Like, the Stormraven really needs now +1 to wound to make it really good. Now, Josh was playing the Plasma here, and I believe the multi-shot, like the Onslaught Gatling Cannon, which means that he's gone for the lower strength option and relied on +1 to wound, which is why it's good in Ultramarines. Stormlance gives you access to -1 to hit and wound, which is really good for the Stormraven. You can play a little bit more aggressively there. So he's got Manius, Gilliman, Uriel, and 5 Sternguard, 2 Ballistas, 3 Eradicators, 5 Scouts, 3 Stormspeeder Hammer Strikes, and the Stormraven Gunship. This list doesn't have access to fall back and shoot, which is an interesting component because it's playing Stormlance, but it can stay in combat with a lot of these units, right? Ballistas Dreadnoughts, Stormspeeders, and Stormraven, if you tag it in combat, can just shoot into combat, and they're perfectly fine with that. The Stormspeeders are a lot better in Ultramarines, and actually it's an interesting tech choice, especially in this meta with Knights. Getting +1 to wound with a lot of melters is kind of interesting. Gives you ignore cover as well, which I think is good on the Stormraven. So, all in all, 2 great lists here. You can play whatever you want. You can even play lists without Gilliman, without Manius if you'd like. But, I mean, they provide you with an archetype which is shooting dominant and 2 extremely high quality melee pieces. And it's a very powerful archetype to play because being able to heroic onto your objectives or heroic the melee portions of melee armies is really good. And, Manius and Gilliman almost take out a big knight themselves each. I think Manius does with +1 to wound and oath, it does 18 to 20 damage or something. Gilliman can one-shot a knight, 7 attacks at 14 -4/4. If you hit and wound with all of them, they don't have an invuln, it's a dead knight. So, really good. Ultramarines in a fantastic spot. I said in my Stormlance video, tournament I was playing last weekend, if I wanted to win, I would play Ultramarines, and if I wanted to try something new, play Stormlance, have some fun doing some hobby. Alright, Black Templars. Okay, new kids are on the block. We did a Adeptus Astartes masterclass with Olivier Weiss to do the Black Templars section, which is cool. And if you like Marines. We have a Adeptus Society's Masterclass at 40k Fireside, of course, and it's particularly we have Chris Radford for Space Wolves. We have myself on Gladius Ultramarines. We have Ennis Wilson to do Dark Angels as well. Black Templars. Okay, so going back to the overview, let's think about the meta right now. And do we want an army that has a good combination of shooting and melee? Yes. Well, Black Templars seem to be fitting that bill really well, and they've got some serious things going for them. So they have a lot of good shooting. Now, the premier datasheet here, the Repulse Executioner, has a rule which is quite interesting. Basically, Black Templars, they don't get Oath of Moment anymore, which is pretty big, right? But they get the Vow, which is a kind of replacement of that. And the Vow, which you're probably going to take most of the time, is +1 to wound if your strength is lower than their toughness, which is awesome, because a lot of your stuff is like lethal hits and strength 5. Sick. It's in combat only. But one of their premier platforms, which is also a transport, which also works out well for you, is the Repulse Executioner. It gets 4 rerolls to hit. If you have a friendly unit within 12 of the unit you are shooting, it gets 4 rerolls to hit. I don't really know why they thought that would be a good idea, but that's what the conclusion that they've come to. I'm just going to put it out there. If they charge you Repulse Executioner and you can see them, you have 4 rerolls to hit. So, okay, the shooting back end, fantastic, because the Repulse Executioner, it lets you kill chaff. It's fantastic against big targets, right? Like Death Guard, it can just reliably shoot a bloat drone off the table, can reliably kill a Blight Hauler. They show their Plague Beast Crawlers, it can downstream them really well. Then they've got Gladiators. The Gladiators are the same points. Oh, the Repix is the same points as the Ultramarines one, or the normal Marine one. The Gladiator is the same amount of points, but it just gets a multi-melter as well. Okay, 2-shot melter. That seems pretty good. And they've still got Ballistus Dreadnoughts, of course, as well. So, you've got a build here which can look very similar to Ultramarines, right? You've got a Repix with 4 rerolls, you've got Ballistus Dreadnought with 4 rerolls, and Gladius, right? Which is really powerful shooting base, because Repix is a huge amount of damage, good toughness because they're toughness 12, and 3-up save at 16 wounds. Ballistus Dreadnoughts, which have a 2-up save as well. So your shooting base could look like 3 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, 2 Repulsor Executioners, right? Fantastic. On top of that, they have really good combat, obviously, because they're Black Templars, right? You get Helbricht, who has massive amounts of damages, and it really amplifies the unit it joins. Does mortal wounds now, which is good. Well, a little bit more consistently. Then you've got the Emperor's Champion, who, he's like the melee Infernal Master, but even better now. He can flip to a dice every phase, and so that means he's really hard to kill. And in Gladius, you've got 2 great options. Honor the Vehement, and you've also got Artificer's Armor, 2 enhancements you can put on him to make him really, really sick. So he's looking great. He also moves faster and gives you bonuses to charge against character units. Awesome. Then you've got Sword Brethren, who, just have a ton of lethal hits, and actually the output's really good. And for 130 points for 5, they're really, really well positioned, I think. Not to mention, they all are going to be a unit size, less than 7. Put those babies in a Repix, man. Combo. Sword Brethren also have the ability to move 6 when your opponent falls back from you. So if you're playing against a mono-phase shooting army, or you're just playing against an army where, they don't have a ton of great melee options, if they fall back from you, just jump back in your Repulsor Executioner, or just jump back into your Impulsor or something like that. Transports, yeah, of course they have the Impulsor and the Repulsor. The Impulsor clearly gets the multi-melter as well, which is super good. And comboing with Sword Brethren, that's awesome. Gladius, you can also reactive move. So they got good transports, and I think actually Helbricht's unit, one that she can join, can actually go in a Rhino as well for even cheaper. Then the detachments. The ones in the Codex supplement aren't amazing, but, Gladius and Stormlance look absolutely premium for these two. I would say Gladius fits a little bit more, because you have +1 to wound on melee with the strat, +1 AP, which is really good as well. If you're enhanced, if you're at a point where you're not +1 to wound because you didn't select that Val maybe, but you have fallback and shoot, which is massive, advance and shoot, advance and charge. So one of your units will advance and charge already, but if you need advance and charge on one unit for one key turn, that's where you're going to have it. Stormlance, you get advance and charge all the time, But I think with Black Templars, the shooting base looks quite good, so Gladius is going to be a little bit better there. If the melee was quite dominant, I would maybe go with Stormlance, but then again, you're only really getting it for like one really good strat there, which would be the flat 6 reactive move, but you're mainly playing for the detachment ability because you don't have a ton of mounted or flying units that you're going to trigger -1 hit and wound or the auto advance on, for example. So Gladius is looking really strong, looking for the most direct build. And then, we can't forget Ironstorm. Ironstorm is looking like a legitimate build with Black Templars again. You get that reroll, hit or wound roll. You get the free multi-melters. Repexes are looking great. So Ironstorm maybe over Stormlance if you're looking for some serious shooting options there. So I think Black Templars looking great. I'm going to have a masterclass out for them probably around the end of the week, particularly focusing on some of the key detachments, some good play patterns that I've noticed and everything like that. So I'll be doing that one because I've been playing a ton of Marines recently. So check that out on 40k Fireside in a bit here. Okay, Blood Angels. Keep going. Blood Angels are an interesting one. I think that they are pretty meta dependent, and they're an army I think that can really change depending on what you're playing and what your opponent's playing. For example, like the last 400 to 500 points, I think, 400 points in Blood Angels make a huge difference depending on what army you're playing is. Let's take a look at maybe Ultramarines Gladius. If you're playing 6 hulls or 4 hulls, your list probably doesn't change. It probably doesn't affect the matchups dramatically, right? But Blood Angels and the terrain format, okay, you can still advance and shoot. You still got Manius and Gilliman to play aggressively. So your terrain format doesn't really affect them massively, I would say. Blood Angels is the exact opposite, in my opinion. Depending on what you take in the last 400-ish points can have a dramatic impact on your deployment, how your opponent can respect you or not, because you need to make a huge decision, which is, are you going to play shooting? And I think for every single person on the planet who plays Blood Angels, this has been a plague for them. Am I going to play shooting? Am I going to play 2 Vindicators? Oh my god, they're expensive, but then they feel so bad sometimes. But if I'm not playing shooting, then my opponent can disrespect me. If my boards are open, I need to play shooting, but I don't really want to, etc., etc. So that can be a big burden for Blood Angels, whether or not you're going to be playing shooting. Let me take a drink here. It's hot here. So, then we've also got the meta. The meta can have a pretty big impact as well, of course. Now, Death Guard is a tough one, right? If you're playing Virulent Victorum, whatever it's called, the index one, and they've got fights first bricks with Plague Marines, yeah, that's going to be a tough matchup. If they've got, no advance within range and fights first, if they've got Plague Burst Crawlers, that's going to be a tough one. So if your game plan revolves around all-inning your opponent and they play solid, that's hard. They've got Death Shroud, which are amazing against your army because Rapid Ingress Heroicing is really tough to play around. So I think that's a really tough matchup in general. Death Guard just have 200-ish points too much right now, which is a lot. On top of that, they just have fantastic utility all the way across the board. They've got Indirect Fire. By the way, Death Guard have Manticores, if you guys don't know. Like, straight up Manticores. The Lord of Virulence will just target a unit in your deployment zone. They get 4 rerolls to hit against it. Or they could just see a unit in your deployment zone with their Poxwalkers. They get 4 rerolls to hit against it. That's a Manticore. I don't know why people aren't complaining more about these Manticore burst crawlers. So yeah, they got a lot of stuff, hard to trade up, and when you do go in, they can clean you up very fast and efficiently. Okay, Imperial Knights. A tough one again, I think, here. Imperial Knights, especially if they're playing something like a 3-6 split, or like a 4-2 is a little bit easier, but a 3-6 split I think is pretty tough. Imperial Knights are a nightmare. Here's why. You're playing Blood Angels, you're like, great, my opponent has, Canis Rex, an Atropos, 1 other big guy, and 6 small knights. I think this is probably like the best variance of the build, and like 5, agents or something like that. Your opponent's like putting some armigers out there, you're like, damn, an armiger has 14 wounds, toughness 9, with a 6 up, feel no pain, so it's effectively like 16 and 0.3 wounds. Does one of my units kill that? No, it does not. So, okay, I need to consider like how I'm going to deal with just tackling their primary. Do I need to overtrade into and overcommit into these small knights? Then once I get to 4 CP, they have both interrupt and guaranteed fight on death. So their Atropos that they might lead with whatever might interrupt. Canis Rex can just fight on death even if you manage to down him, which is tough in one go. So then they just have the Cascade Gatling Cannon guy or something like that who can just, pump you with like 36 shots or something. So, Imperial Knights is a bit of a tough one, man. I think Chaos Knights can be pretty similar. With Infernal Lance, they get the 5-up invuln in combat, which is very good against you, of course. And then they have Dreadlords has access to Vect and Fight First, which is, Fight First on a big knight is kind of tough. So they can fight first and then they interrupt afterwards if you want. But mainly, I think it comes down to the fact that they've these builds that have like 3-6 or even 4-2 with some beasts, Nurgle or Nurglings. They can start the game by just putting a knight out there to pressure you, and you're going to trade down into that, and that's a tough proposition over a 5-turn game if they play aggressive early. Thousand Suns, okay, I'm sure there's lots of Blood Angels players out there that smash Thousand Suns, but a good Thousand Suns player with Magnus is an absolute nightmare to play against. They will bully you with Magnus. They will bully you with Overwatch, with Crystal. They'll play defensively for like 2 turns while chipping away at you and gaining board space, and then you'll find that you have very little options to get back in the game. Necrons, I think they'll do well against. So this is a list Chris Radford, our teammate, is playing again at a tournament coming up. He's been playing a lot of Blood Angels, but I think the boards can kind of make Blood Angels hard to operate on sometimes as well, especially if there's a lot of shooting or if the objectives are in the open. So Games Workshop boards can be a little bit difficult, I think, there. And some of the UKTC layouts, particularly the Dawn of War ones, whilst you are close, all the objectives are in the open. So if you go first, you kind of need to put something on the objective, which usually means it's just going to die. So, yeah. So that's Blood Angels. I think they don't love a meta that is thick and really stat checky, particularly at the high toughness breakpoints. That's tough for them. And Death Guard at the top there being hard is a really tough thing to consider because you are going to be playing in a deep tournament run Death Guard at some point. No doubt about it. Okay, Dark Angels. This slide here is going to be taken from the masterclass we did with Ernest Wilson, talking about Wrath of the Rock and Stormlance. So I think Wrath of the Rock is probably like, I think Dark Angel is actually kind of close to Space Wolves in terms of their power level, all around. I would definitely put Space Wolves a lot higher if the Iron Priest nerf hadn't come through, right? But that did come through, so I think it's a lot. They're a lot. That hit them a lot. Now, that's why I think Blood Angels, Dark Angels are in a pretty similar spot here. Now, every list, same as before, 3x5 Deathwing Knights. You can see Innes's list here with Wrath of the Rock. He went to a couple of tournaments with and did really well. Stern Guard with Azrael, 2 Predators to keep people honest, Storm Speed of Thunderstrike for like ignore cover. And this is not running Lion, but it's got a little bit more chaff around the outside. So a bit more shooting, a bit more mission play with like Vanguard vets. I think they can get like the assault keyword or something. So that's why he was saying the Inferno pistols are quite nice on them. And then your classic brick of 15 Deathwing Knights with -1. That's basically what you're going to be playing a lot of the time. And Wrath of the Rock, really good in combat matchups. But combat matchups are not particularly prevalent at the moment. And I guess the big part about them, the Deathwing Knights, as opposed to like Stormlance Terminators. Stormlance Terminators, I think, are better. But Deathwing Knights have the 4-up anti-vehicle, right? So they're just going to be wounding even big knights on 4s anyway as well. -1 damage is very good into some circumstances, though. But 4 wounds versus -1 damage at 3 depends on the meta where it is at the moment, as to which is kind of better. Okay, then we have Stormlance. He's got Azrael, Combi Lieutenant, obviously Combi Lieutenant in both. Samael with Inner Circle Companions, I want to say. 2 JPI squads, 15 Deathwing Knights, Infiltrators, Inner Circle Companions, Outriders, and 2 Hammer Strikes here. So you can probably see like this type of list in Stormlance is going to suffer a lot more when you're playing on more open boards here, right? Sorry, Samael with Outriders and Azrael with the ICCs. Because it is almost completely melee orientated, right? You do have the Outriders, which can go pretty fast in Stormlance, and Storm Speeders can help hold some objectives, but depending on what terrain format and what meta you're playing into, it's going to be a tough proposition playing this little amount of shooting, I think. For example, into Knights, I think this list doesn't really have anything that could just kill a baby Knight, for example. And it doesn't have anything that could kill a baby Knight from ranged, which means that you're going to have to commit onto an objective near them. They can obviously hit like Heroic, for example. But them killing your Deathwing Knights, if they've got like Canis, for example, is going to be reasonably trivial. They have a bunch of flat 4 shots. I think the Atropos is also flat 4. So you can all of a sudden get your Deathwing Knights down to a position where they can't really kill anything because they only have like 3 guys left or 2 guys left. And then they're just going to get mopped up by small stuff. So I think Dark Angels are interesting, but the meta we're in right now is not really suited for them. I'm not unhappy that 15 Deathwing Knights is not a crazy good build, but having said that, even I still think this is a 4-1 list, 4-1 army, easily. So bottom of A tier, I think, definitely. And I think the only Marine build that we've got at the moment, which is not an A tier, is Deathwatch, which is pretty sad. As in, like, the army strength is sad. It's great that we've got, like, there's lots of builds that are in A tier. It just goes to show, like, how much build around the detachments and, supplemental shared Space Marine units, which are just usually pretty good, yeah. Okay, so where do they stand? I realize I've made an error here. Stormlance, Wrath of the Rock capitals. So where do they stand? I think Ultramarines are the best Marine chapter right now. I'm willing to concede that Black Templars could be up there, but that's going to have to be proven to me first. If I was going to go play LGT tomorrow, London Grand Tournament, if you don't know what that is, I would play Ultramarines. I would play playing Ultramarines Gladius, and my playstyle is I love a solid shooting army. I feel more comfortable playing aggressive with shooting armies than other armies, and so I love the way that Ultramarines Gladius has a great shooting base with some key melee pieces. It's got such a great expansion play, and it's got a good play for your playing aggressive through the middle and shooting and squeezing around the edges. Stormlance is good as well, but I probably wouldn't take the Stormlance build with the Stormraven just for me, though. Black Templars. I think I'm going to put Black Templars in second because I think actually Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and Dark Angels are actually a pretty significant margin behind Ultramarines, in my opinion. After having played a little bit of Blood Angels, played a lot of Space Wolves, and a lot of Deathwatch, there's a noticeable power difference compared when you're comparing them to Ultramarines. If the meta were to change, though, I could see Space Wolves and Blood Angels getting a lot better, right? Because the meta has a real toughness skew to it at the moment, which is where the +1 to wound really shines. So I've got Black Templars in second, based off some really early findings, and I think Gladius is going to be a great build for them. Blood Angels have gotten third. Now, there is quite a big difference between first, second, and third, and the rest here. Well, first, there's a big difference between first and second, and the rest here. Blood Angels, I think, are the better variant out of the bottom 4. But it does depend on what terrain format you've got. I don't think there's much between Blood Angels and Space Wolves, and if you said, hey David, I think Beast Slayer is better in the meta right now because of my terrain format XYZ, I would say, yeah, I can see that over Blood Angels because of the shooting element being a bit more prevalent. If you're on a terrain format where it's super dense for some reason or whatever, maybe like Frontline Gaming or something, then I think Blood Angels is better than Space Wolves. But if you're a little bit more open, I think the Stormlance build that I played with some reliable shooting and a bit more speed to it could be a little bit better, right? So it depends on your board states, board terrain layouts there, I think. Blood Angel is going to be a little bit better on dense boards. Space Wolves is going to be a little bit better on more open boards. Goes to show also that I think Eldari is actually turning out to be quite a great faction again, and Space Wolves can get move blocked a lot, especially in Stormlance. So Blood Angels will just easily tow over that. Okay, we've got Dark Angels in 5th, and then Deathwatch in 6th. Now, I think, Space Wolves, Blood Angels, Dark Angels are all pretty close. I think the ceiling is a bit higher for both Space Wolves and Blood Angels, but I think the floor is a lot higher for... no, I don't think the floor is higher for Dark Angels. I think it's lower, probably. So, just not the ability to punch up with Dark Angels. And Deathwatch, well, that's where we are. Okay, that's been the video for today. Let me know what you think. Any spicy builds out there? Let me know what you think about Black Templars. I'm curious to see what everyone is liking in them. Bunch of new characters to explore. I've got all my new characters here to paint up again as well, of course. So I'm looking forward to getting onto that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if the meta does get nerfed. Death Guard and Knights. Where exactly these faction rankings kind of end up within Space Marines. But regardless of that, I think if you've got a core Space Marine collection, just buying 1 or 2 units and 2 characters, you can swap easily, I've found, into different builds, which is really, really good if you're trying to make a great run at a tournament coming up. Like LGT, for example, it's coming up big. I'm probably going to be playing Space Marines, depending on how the meta changes up. There we go. It's been David. Once again, if you've gotten this far in the video, thanks for watching. You can check out and learn from the best people, players in the game, 40kfireside.com, or our YouTube membership. So drop a like, comment, and subscribe. It really, really helps us grow. We've just hit 6K. We hit 5K a while ago, and we're growing really fast, and everything's going well. Thank you, guys. Au revoir.
Thank you for listening to the 40k Fireside. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, drop us a comment, check out the YouTube members area, and we look forward to seeing you again next time by the Fireside.